This is the mid-April foliage of Lavandula X Intermedia, cultivar Grosso. This foliage is so incredibly fragrant. It's beautiful silver. It's got kind of a rough texture to it. The plant's about 12 inches tall, 15 inches wide, and it is absolutely divine. This is a herbaceous perennial in the family Lamiaceae. The plants are hardy from zones 5 through 8. Anything colder than 5, they better have some snow cover or some protection. Anything warmer than zone 8 on the east coast, they're not going to like the heat and humidity. On the west coast, they're not going to like the fact that it never gets cool in the winter. So that's why 5 through 8 is pretty ideal for them. These plants, because they do have that incredibly fragrant foliage and flower, are resistant to rabbits and deer. So that makes them ideal in our climate. They are resistant to drought, dry soil, and they actually prefer shallow, rocky soil. They also prefer a little bit of alkalinity. Of course, our native soil in this region is somewhat acidic, so that can be a challenge. Maybe you need to throw a little pulverized limestone around your lavender just to ensure they're going to do well. The plants are going to have terminal flower spikes, of course, lavender, in June through August. So they are a summer blooming plant. Again, it's important that you do not amend the soil unless you're adding drainage. It does not need organic material. It does not need compost. These plants want sand, gravel, limestone rocks, chunks of block. I mean, just terrible soil. Because remember, they are native to the Mediterranean region, and that region is not known for extremely rich, moist soil. Lavandula intermedia is a cross between Lavandula angustifolia and Lavandula latifolia. The plant is semi-woody, which means after a few years it's going to start getting some woody stems at the base. So what you need to do is go through and do some regular pruning on this plant. So I'm going to sacrifice one of these stems and show you what I would do. We have an entire, back it up a little bit, an entire 10 inches probably. I would go through and pretty much cut this one in half. And that is what I'd be left with. And that means you've reduced this bulk on the top of the plant, which you can also put into a sachet, make you some potpourri. And then you've got more light coming through here, more air circulation, and then that leaves more room for these plants to grow. If you don't do any pruning on your lavenders, what's going to happen is the tops are going to get very thick, they're going to shade out the bottom, they're also going to get very heavy, and they're going to splay open. And that can happen over time anyway. But you can slow that process down by doing regular pruning on your lavenders. Again, springtime is a good time to do it because that's before the new growth is going to start. All these little tips are going to grow and give you flowers later in the season anyway. Make sure your soil is extremely well drained, no amendments. And oftentimes too, what people will suggest is rather than mulching with an organic mulch like pine bark or definitely not leaf compost, you could use gravel or rock, because when you put those things at the base, there isn't as much moisture going up through there, and of course these plants are from rocky areas anyway. So try these intermediate lavenders, mulch with some stones, some rocks, give them some sandy soil, and see how well you do with Lavandula X Intermedia, cultivar Grosso, in the family Lamiaceae. This is Primula Japonica. The Japanese primrose, or sometimes called the candelabra primrose. It's in the family Primulaceae, and it is a fantastic herbaceous perennial for wet conditions. Here it's growing on the edge of a pathway that is pretty soupy right now, and this plant is in full flower in early May in northern Maryland. The leaves are somewhat lettuce-like in that they're light green, they're a basal rosette, and they're somewhat smooth. The flowers are slightly fragrant, and of course the name like candelabra primrose, you can start to see the flowers that are produced in these tiered effects. This single color red is pretty striking. They typically come in yellows, oranges, whites, and pinks, almost anything but black, brown, or the darkest purple. Primula are not bothered by rabbits, and they are pretty robust perennials, especially when the soil is moist and humusy and it stays consistently moist throughout the summer. They'll grow even down further south into the Carolinas as long as there is dappled shade. These guys are growing in the shade of a liquid amber, which is our native sweet gum, and they've got some Camassia lectinii behind them, which also don't mind the wet conditions as well. So Primula Japonica is a fantastic kind of mid-spring blooming perennial that is ridiculously tolerant of wet conditions, and that is the key, tolerance of wet conditions. The fact that rabbits don't eat it is just a plus. This is Viola Wittrockiana, commonly called the pansy. Technically a herbaceous perennial, but of course we grow it as an annual. It's hardy from zones 6 through 10, but you'll only find that happening in the milder zones, especially with cool summers. It's the family Violaceae, and these are of garden origin, but remember we have 3 parents, all of which are from Europe, so we're going to call this a European native. This plant does best in full sun, but likes a little bit of afternoon shade if you're going to make it last throughout the season. The plant does attract butterflies later into the spring, and even better, it does resist deer. Relatively short-lived, as we talked about, mostly because of the summer heat. This is late April in southern Virginia. The tulips have finished flowering, and these guys are about to finish up as well. Plant these in consistently moist soil, but make sure it's well drained. Cut back leggy plants earlier in the season, but once they start to get into the summer heat, that's really not going to help too much. If you're in a milder zone, specifically zone 7, maybe 8, you can plant these in the fall, and they'll look lovely all the way into the springtime. Let's pull out a little bit and look at this entire bed. You can see the flowers that pretty much covered the entire plant here, but let's pull one out and look a little bit more carefully at the flowers, which have this wonderful lip in the center. Oftentimes it'll have some black on it. Flower buds are produced deep down inside. No need for deadheading these guys. They do have terminal flowers. When you look at the foliage is lightly scalloped. So you can see it has this little bit of cut on the edge there. Relatively small leaves, but they can be sometimes twice the size. The stems are somewhat hollow, almost a little bit of a hole in the center there. Plants are pretty close to the ground, only growing to about 6 inches, maybe 10 or 12 inches. These are medium-sized flowers. You can find the majestic giants, which have flowers which are twice the size of this one, or you can find the ones called Johnny Jump-Ups, which have flowers that are only half the size of them. In this bed, it looks like we have some smaller flowers, just to give you a little bit of a comparison for what the Johnny Jump-Ups might do, the mid-range, and we don't have the Pacific Giants here. So Viola X Wittrockiana in the family Violaceae, and these guys have parents that are native to Europe, and they are deer resistant. Fantastic springtime annuals, usually finishing up by late May, early June. Perfect time to plant your heat-loving summer annuals at that point.